on, and while the Knicks were part of a three-team deal, they didn't make any major trades before the clock struck 3 p.m. Leon Rose and his front office seems confident in their roster as currently constructed as the Knicks look to make the postseason for the first time in 8 years. Hello and welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley trade deadline recap. We are presented, as always, by 888 Sport. Bet $20 on the Knicks or Nets and get $88 in free bets using promo code SNY88. I'm Chirs Williamson alongside SNY NBA insider Ian Begley, and we're joined by 18-year NBA scout Michael Vandegarde. And for the second time this week, the franchise CP of Knicks Fan TV. We're live on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages, and you can get involved in the comment section throughout this entire stream. But first, we're going to kick things off with the baseline. And Ian, before we get into specific players and deals that did or didn't happen, the Knicks remained relatively quiet at the trade deadline. Why did they decide to take a conservative approach this week?
Well, talking to teams that were in touch with the Knicks as a couple weeks ago, the thinking then was they didn't want to interrupt their chemistry, right? They felt that the group had overperformed expectations, which they had, and they didn't want to do anything big to take away from that. And they felt that they weren't going to overextend themselves to bring a player in here that was going to interrupt things. So that was part of their thinking. And I assume that's what carried the day on Thursday, because they didn't give up. They could have given up, Mitchell Robinson, first round pick, whatever, to get Lonzo Ball. They could have given up future assets to get different players, Victor Oladipo. They didn't do that. They stood pat. I assume that the idea that they were playing well, they have been playing well, and this group has pretty good chemistry together, played a role in their decision-making.
So they keep it pretty low key, during this trade deadline. So tell us, though, about the trade that they did make.
Right. So they were trying to find a home for Austin Rivers. The Knicks were working with Rivers representation at CAA to try to make something happen. And so if it didn't happen via trade, it was going to happen via buyout. And I think this was a win-win because you got Austin Rivers to Oklahoma City in that three-team deal that sent George Hill to Philly. And then you get 2 second-round picks. One of them is heavily protected. And you get Terrence Ferguson. And Ferguson's still a young player. You get to take a look at him for a few months, decide if you want to keep him on. I believe he's a restricted free agent this offseason. And so this was, in my view at least, they're getting something back for Austin Rivers as opposed to just waiving him and getting nothing back.
Yeah, it's always good when you can get a return on your investment that you made earlier in the season. And CP, on Tuesday, you seemed into the Knicks pursuing Norman Powell, but he ends up in Portland. How did you feel now that the trade deadline has come and gone?
Well, you know what? Not surprised because I felt like they were going to be disciplined and not really, overextend themselves to make a rush decision. They had their targets, just like free agency. They had their targets, but they stuck to their game plan. I'm sure there was a price they were willing to meet with these trades, and they didn't get Lonzo. They didn't get Norman Powell. But as Ian said, look, we're playing with house money right now. We've already surpassed last year's win total. We've surpassed Vegas's expectations at 22 wins. We're now at 23 and 22, sitting at 5th in the East. And so we're doing a lot with a little right now. And this is the team that we're going to go forward with into the playoffs, or hopefully into the playoffs. So I'm not surprised. I'm not disappointed. I'm just okay with the fact that they didn't mortgage any future capital or draft capital, and that they're intent on going to war with what they have.
Yeah, that's a blessing, the fact that they didn't rush to make any type of short-term decision that would impact the team in a negative manner, especially with the chemistry route. Michael, what did you make of the Knicks' conservative approach, though?
I think they're taking a long look and using a long lens to try to fill out this team. I really think it comes down to star chasing. The cap room that they're going to have this summer. I don't know that they're going to be able to land a star in the free agency market, but we all know, and we've seen it time and time again, when a disgruntled star wants to make a move, where's the logical destinations? And, I'm not sure LA can handle another one cap wise. Brooklyn can't do anything cap wise. The next logical destination is probably New York, and keeping your cap room available and keeping the assets that they have available to star chase whenever that may be, whether it's 6 months, a year, 2 or 3 years down the road. They just need to have that flexibility to, land that next disgruntled star, and hopefully 2 stars when that time comes with the cap room. So I think they didn't make trades for quality players, but none of those players are going to be stars, and none of those players are going to dramatically change the trajectory of the Knicks, long term.
Right. I definitely hear that. And remember to keep your questions coming in the comment section on whatever platform you're watching us on. We'll try to get as many of them as possible. Let's move on to some specifics. And C Mamba on Twitter asked about Andre Drummond, Ian, and the Cavaliers are working out a buyout for center Drummond, who would fit into the Knicks financially wise. Could he still end up in NYC?
Yeah, listen, I said it a couple of days ago. I'll say it again. I know there are a couple prominent voices in that Knick organization that see Drummond as a good fit, see him as a player that they should bring on. But I know as of earlier this week, at least, there was no consensus on Drummond. There were some people who felt that he would not be a good fit, that this is not the right move. So I think that will continue to be debated internally in New York. And they obviously have a financial advantage, right? Because they have that cap space. I think it's around $15 million. So they can offer Drummond a 4-year, $64 million deal, I believe. And the other teams who are interested in him certainly can't match that, can't come close to it. So I think the Knicks are going to at least talk to Drummond. I think that internal debate is going to continue. And Drummond's also going to decide whether he wants to go chase a ring, make an impact in the playoffs heading into free agency, or secure himself financially by coming to New York.
And CP, it's interesting because Andre Drummond is one of the best rebounders in the NBA, but he still hasn't been able to find a home. And he's a very polarizing figure on Knicks Twitter. How do you feel about Drummond with the Knicks?
Very polarizing figure, as you said. Right now, if once he gets bought out by the Cavs, since you don't have to trade for him in the short term, I wouldn't necessarily mind it. My thing is if he's considering the Knicks over some more established contenders, maybe there's a promise there of a long-term deal, and that's what I'm concerned with. The Athletic wrote a piece that stated, Brock Aller's affinity for Andre Drummond and Brock Aller being an integral piece to bringing Drummond to Cleveland. So could that still be there? Brock Aller's intentions of bringing him here. I just don't know how he's going to impact the chemistry. He's a guy, he doesn't finish well at the rim, 52% at the rim, 59% from the free throw line. I like to create some more spacing for RJ Barrett and Julius Randle. You saw RJ out there last night as the floor was spaced. He was wheeling and dealing and getting his shots off into the paint late in that fourth quarter in the win against the Wizards. I just like giving those guys a bit more room. We don't know about Drummond as far as a locker room presence. Could he shake up the chemistry there? He was on the outs with Cleveland because he didn't want to, accept a limited role with them. So how would he come in here and impact the Knicks? So on the short term, of course, you wouldn't mind having a guy as a double-double machine, bringing him in. But long term, I just don't think the league is catering towards his style of play anymore. And I just like to keep things flexible. I like the way that Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel are flexible on the defensive end. I also like the fact that the Knicks can go with Julius in the small ball 5 position to give us some more offense. So I would rather go that way, but in the short term, I wouldn't necessarily mind it.
Right. And so, Michael, how would you evaluate Drummond's his fit with the Knicks' current roster currently constructed?
I think he fits well. I think he's an upgrade over Nerlens Noel. How much of an upgrade, people can debate that. The question I have is how much does that stunt Mitchell Robinson? He's a young guy that they're invested in and they have high hopes for, with him being out for the last, 6 weeks with his injury and just coming back. We need to see how good Mitchell Robinson is going to be. I see Mitchell Robinson as a long-term fit, when the Knicks have a chance to chase a championship. This year they're chasing the playoffs, which is great, much improved from last year, but they're not chasing a championship. And to me, like I said before, you got to look at the long lens. Is Andre Drummond the guy that you want to have eat some cap space 2 to 3 years from now, when you have championship aspirations and you're building that team and trying to find those superstars, versus, the short-term fix, and maybe he's an upgrade over Nerlens Noel.
Mike, right. I have an X's and O's question for you, because I spoke to a team, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that they didn't think that it would help Julius Randle, right? It would take away from the space that he operates in. They thought it would hamper him if you bring in Andre Drummond. I just wanted to get your thoughts there, because it was just one team, and obviously everybody has opinions. What are your thoughts on how Drummond could impact Julius Randle?
I think it depends upon the mindset he comes in with. If he gets a longer term deal with the Knicks, he doesn't have to prove himself as a scorer and a playmaker and a post up guy. If he comes in just as a hired hand for a couple months and he's got to find his next deal, he's going to want his touches in the post. And that definitely, clogs up the lane for Julius Randle. But when Andre Drummond is at his best, he's a rim runner, he's a, lob catcher, dunker, and he's a defensive player. And obviously he's a great rebounder. So, if he's going to play his role and have his role set and he's not going to come in wanting those touches, I think he fits great. If he's trying to find that next opportunity for his next contract, it might not work out as well as you want.
You brought up another good point, Mitchell Robinson, because just the way I see it, outside looking in, you bring in Andre Drummond and you sign him to a multi-year deal. You're trading Mitchell Robinson. Am I wrong? I mean, is there a way for those two to coexist on the same roster if you're going to have to extend Robinson eventually and pay him significant money?
Yeah, if you probably extend Drummond now, I think you actually get him at a pretty good value. Mm-hmm. So I think you could have both those guys around, and then at some point you either trade Drummond or Robinson. It definitely, like we said, will stunt Mitchell Robinson's growth, and I think that's a more important question. Is Mitchell Robinson part of the future in 3 years, or is Andre Drummond going to help us win a playoff series in the next 2 or 3 years? That's a trade-off. The hierarchy of the Knicks have to decide what they want to do. The New York Knicks are in the luxury of selling out every game, and everybody, in town has interest in them and talking about them. But are you really chasing a championship? Do you want to figure out how good Mitchell Robinson is and chase stars? Or do we just want to make the playoffs and get a little bit better and feel good about ourselves because we haven't been good for 20 years?
Yeah, and I think the Knicks want to win that championship. They don't want to just make the playoffs. I mean, that's great for this year, but looking long term, it's obviously got to be at the top, the creme de la creme. And we'll get to Mitchell Robinson in a bit, but how would you feel if the Knicks signed Andre Drummond? Would you love it, hate it, or be left confused? Go to sny.tv/vote now for this week's fan choice presented by 888 Sport. Bet $20 on the Knicks or Nets and get $88 in free bets using promo code SNY88. And Ian, Lonzo Ball is still a Pelican, but you reported in the aftermath of the trade deadline that Ball could still end up in New York. Please enlighten us about that.
Right. So I was just speaking with somebody who had a pretty good knowledge of the talks between the Knicks and the Pelicans and Ball and the whole dynamic. And they were saying that they expected this to be an offseason thing again, where the Knicks would have interest in Ball and would, pursue him. And obviously Ball is going to be a restricted free agent. The Knicks, with their cap space, could make a pretty strong offer. Their scenario is also where maybe New Orleans would want to pursue a sign and trade again, although if Ball gets to restricted free agency, I don't see why the Knicks would be volunteering to give up assets. But the thing that confused me a little bit is, there were so many reports about Ball not being a part of New Orleans' future and New Orleans being ready to trade him. So either they didn't get the price that they wanted, and I don't think the Knicks were ready to reach any high price for Ball because he's going to be around this offseason, or did they change their thinking and now do they want to re-sign him this offseason? I don't think they do. I think it's still going to be Lonzo on a different team come the offseason, but it just confused me the way that the Pelicans handled that at the deadline.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting decisions being made by front offices all around the league, not just the Pelicans. And CP, under what circumstances would you like to see Lonzo Ball in a Knicks uniform?
Well, this is why I didn't mind, them not getting him or making any rush decisions, during yesterday's trade deadline, because now you have options. Maybe you can just sign him into the cap space without giving up assets. Maybe you do a sign and trade and it costs you a little bit less. Or, there were Malcolm Brogdon rumors going out there. Maybe you go after him. So you have options there. But the benefit of obtaining Lonzo Ball is I think he increases the overall offensive flow of the team. He picks up the pace. They'll improve in fast break points. 46% from the corner three. He'll be a better outlet than Elfrid Payton is for RJ and Julius Randle to space the floor for them. We also talked about Mitchell Robinson, having a capable point guard that can get guys like Mitchell Robinson and Obi Toppin going in terms of the pick and roll, getting the Gotham lob going. That increases the overall value of your assets when you're talking about looking to acquire players down the road. So I would definitely look into pursuing Lonzo in the offseason for sure.
And Michael, when you've watched, evaluated Lonzo's games from the time that he's stepped into the NBA with the Lakers, now with the Pelicans, what improvements has he made over the course of his NBA career so far?
You know, he's an amazing transformation from what he was to what he is now. His shooting stroke has changed. His release has changed, and his three-point percentage has gone way up. His free throw percentage has gone way up. And I'm actually pretty amazed at his transformation. There's very few guys that have been able to do what he's done. And it's gotten better year after year after year. His first year as a rookie, in effective field goal percentage, he was one of the 10 or 15 worst players in the league. Now he's one of the top 65 players in the league. And he's still young. He's still growing. He's just getting into his prime. And I think as he matures a little bit more, he's even going to become a better player. But everything comes down to his shooting. You know, he's a good defender. He's got size and length. He's obviously a great passer. If he can shoot the ball like he has been and continue this trajectory of shooting it better and better, man, he's got a chance to be an all-star player. And I think he fits exactly what the Knicks are looking for.
And Mike, I have a follow-up there on Lonzo, because I do know that Lonzo is not the only point guard target that they have on their radar for the offseason. So it's not like they're all in on Lonzo. I think they have other options in mind. And the question internally that was being asked was, is Lonzo the point guard of the future for us? And as you could imagine, Mike, because you've had these discussions internally, it wasn't like everybody was in favor of it. So it's going to be interesting to see how they approach it this offseason. But do you think that the shooting is sustainable? Is he, can that be sustainable for him?
I do. With his change of release and his change of his motion, it's dramatically improved. And that was the biggest thing coming out of college that everybody had a question about. Is he going to be able to make shots over players? And is he going to be able to make shots from the three-point line? And it's dramatically improved. This isn't a one-year blip from what I see from the stats. It's gotten progressively better year in and year out, and his form's gotten better year in and year out. And he's still, like I said, a young player. And I think he's at least going to be a league average shooter, if not higher. And he's demonstrated that this year by being, top 65 in effective field goal percentage, which 2 years ago you would have never believed. You would have never believed it.
Definitely not. And you can see that his confidence just keeps getting higher and higher as the season goes on, and keeps sending in those questions about the Knicks. And for more on Leon Rose's post-draft plans, be sure to check out SNY.TV for the latest from Ian. And Ian, the Magic made a ton of deals yesterday, including sending Evan Fournier to the Celtics. Tom Grippa on Facebook asked, we couldn't give up 2 number 2s for Fournier?
Well, they did have a conversation with Orlando about Fournier, and I know that took place, I think, the week prior to the deadline. I don't know if they talked after that. I don't know how serious it got, but I think there were ideas exchanged. And ultimately, at that point, I know that there was some concern about finding a role for Fournier and fitting him into the rotation and where he would fit and who would be benched and things like that. So I think that's part of what held up the deal going through at that point. Again, this was a week or so before the deadline. Whether they circled back, I'm not sure. I haven't heard. But with regard to, giving up those 2 seconds for Fournier, maybe part of the thinking, I'm just guessing here, is they saw Fournier just as a rental and they didn't see him as somebody that they would maybe re-sign in the summer. So maybe they thought that price was too high. 2 seconds to me is not a high price. So I'd be curious to know the thinking on that leading into 3 p.m. yesterday and why they decided not to go that route.
And CP, going off of that fact, you seemed a little frustrated by the fact that Boston only gave up 2 second-rounders to get Fournier. Would you have done that deal if you were Leon Rose?
I would have taken a chance on it. My frustration was more that it was so cheap. 2 2s, as Ian said, I would have done it in a heartbeat. But I can understand the organization being hesitant to bring him in as a rental and where he would fit in the rotation. I mean, if you look at some of the wings that we have right now, you look at Reggie Bullock. He's Thibodeau's, defensive wild card. Tibbs loves him. I think his slot in the rotation is solidified. IQ coming off the bench, being that instant offense as well. But Alec Burks has been on a tear, especially these past 5 games, averaging over 20 points a game. I think he's a better playmaker than Fournier, and he showed that, these last 5 games. He's been crucial. He's been vital in the Knicks win. So his role in the rotation was certainly questionable. I think it was just me being surprised at, how cheap it was for the Celtics to obtain him. You know, Orlando started the tank up, man. There was a fire sale going on Disney. They headlined the trade deadline, and yeah, it was interesting to see.
Yeah, they got rid of everybody, I feel like. Yeah. And once again, you're watching a special live edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. We're back to our normal schedule next week. We drop every Wednesday at 4 p.m. on SNY.TV, always with great guests, the latest news with Knicks and around the NBA, and of course, plenty of fun. And let's talk about the NBA draft right now, Michael. The Knicks have 2 first-round picks, one of their own, one from Dallas in the Kristaps Porzingis trade. Give us an overall sense how strong this draft class can be.
You know, this is one of the better draft classes we've seen in a long time. And I know people say that a lot, but I think the top 5 or 6 guys all have chances to be, you know, special players in this league. And where the Knicks are going to be picking in, you know, the 15 to 20 range, going to have probably 2 picks. There's definitely going to be some players, especially some guys that can shoot the ball. Hopefully, maybe they can find, you know, a point guard if that's what they're looking for, or they can find some wings that can really shoot the ball, because I think that's what the Knicks need long term.
And Ian, Mars Jetson on the YouTube chat is asking, do you see the Knicks consolidating picks in this 2021 draft to move up?
I think if they trade picks, it's going to be for a player. That would be my best guess. Obviously, you can't rule anything out. If they fall in love with somebody at the top, maybe they go that route. But I get the sense that if they're going to use those picks not to pick players at the spot, the more likely route is making a trade for a disgruntled player, a young player who might become available. But I know that it was just with the draft, CP and his guys on Knicks Fan TV are going to be talking about it endlessly in the weeks leading up to that thing. So I'm looking forward to that. And CP, you and Kellerman, man, I mean, I'm not trying to talk sports media here, but I feel like Mike and the Mad Dog, we don't have that duo anymore. Maybe you guys can slide in there, be the next Mike and the Mad Dog. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, maybe. You know, it's called Knicks therapy. I'm slowly bringing Kellerman back into the fold. He sold out to Mickey Mouse and those guys, you know, threw the Knicks under the bus, but I'm slowly bringing him back into the fold. It's been a great experience so far.
We love it, man. It's great TV to see you go toe-to-toe with Max Kellerman and shut him down on a lot of things. And Ian, Camille Khan on YouTube questions how much the Knicks value Mitchell Robinson if they're looking at a guy like Andre Drummond. You reported yesterday that the teams were reaching out to the Knicks about acquiring Mitchell Robinson. So given that question, what does his future look like in the Big Apple?
So I think they were talking about maybe offering him an extension this past offseason. I think that was predicated on the idea, like if they had signed Gordon Hayward, let's say, and used up a bunch of their cap space, then they say, all right, let's lock Mitchell in for the next few years too. Obviously, that didn't happen in free agency. So now, they still have this opportunity to extend him. And my guess is it's still a wait and see thing. I think it's a new regime. They're evaluating everything, including everything that they see from Mitchell Robinson. And certainly Tom Thibodeau has been so optimistic about Robinson, talking all year about how much talent he has, especially on the defensive end. But I think that still you're going to see more evaluation here between the Knicks and Robinson over the rest of the season because they don't have to make a decision, but before they make a decision on whether to extend him this summer or not.
What have you seen, Michael, from Mitchell Robinson's game this season? I know he got injured, so that, kind of stunted some of his growth, but what have you liked or disliked from his season so far?
Yes. Obviously, we all know he's a defensive presence around the rim. His athleticism, and able to guard multiple positions and able to step out and guard a little bit of the pick and roll with his length and his speed, is impressive. But he's a young kid. And to be honest, he hasn't dramatically improved since he's gotten to the NBA. This is his third year, and his stats and his impact on the game is kind of the same as it was his first year. So like we said before, it's kind of a wait and see. He's got a couple months here to show, and I don't think the Knicks need to make any decisions on him. You're going to hold his rights through his rookie, contract. And like I said, I think you're star chasing. And if you lock up a guy with extra money, you don't have that money then to find those stars or bring in those two guys when they get disgruntled. So I think the longer you can hold off, on his contract and giving him his money, the better off you're going to be, salary cap wise for the future. But his game, is still up in the air. No one knows where it's going to go, and he's got to become better at, everything he does. And I don't know that he'll ever be an offensive player, but there's a lot of guys in the league that are super important and great players that aren't offensive players. So he's got to maximize what he is, and he's got to get better every day.
So you're still not sure if he'll be a long-term piece, a core of this Knicks team currently constructed?
I think he can be a quality starter. I don't think he's going to be a superstar. I don't think he's going to be an all-star. I think he's going to be a quality starter. He's going to be a defensive anchor around the rim. He's going to catch and dunk. He's going to score a little bit around the basket. I know his shooting percentage is off the charts, but that's mostly because he's, dunking it all the time. Right. And that's what he is. And you're not going to make him into, an 18-point per game, 20-point per game face-up guy. I just don't think that's his game, and that's not what he's going to be best at. So I think the future is still a question mark with him. But I think a lot of the players on the Knicks are question marks. Besides Julius Randle, it's all a question mark.
Even R.J. Barrett?
I think R.J. Barrett's still a question mark. He's played well this year. He's played really well the last couple months, but it needs to be sustained. I think we all remember Jeremy Lin having the greatest 6 weeks of any NBA player on the planet. We need to see this transformation of R.J. Barrett continue into another year or two. And if I see it in another year, then I'm a believer, and I'm excited about his future. I'm just not sure, a 2-month stretch means we know what he's going to be yet. And he's had a much better 2-month stretch than Mitchell Robinson. So I'm much more comfortable with him than Mitchell Robinson at this point.
I hear you.
One general follow-up question, if I can, on Mitchell, just in the general sense, today's NBA, how important is it to have a 5 who can shoot, who can space the floor, as opposed to, we haven't seen Mitchell shoot from the perimeter yet. How important is it to have your 5 at least be a threat from out there? Do you need it? Do you not need it?
I don't think you need it, but the game keeps trending further and further that direction. We've been talking about it for years, in the basketball world. We always talked about the stretch 4. I think it's going to become the stretch 5. I think in 3, 4, 5 years, it's now going to become the stretch 5. And I think that's going to be a big, thing in the game. And I'll tell you what, Mitchell has more better mechanics than most kids that are the freak athletes at his age that are just defensive players. So he actually has a chance to become, a little bit of a threat, or, somebody that you at least have to guard at 18, 20 feet in the 3-point line down the road. But that's not something I would expect out of him. That would just be a major bonus if he ends up being able to do that.
And we'll get to R.J. Barrett in a bit, but CP, the brains behind Knicks Fan TV, how do you value Mitchell Robinson and his future with the Knicks?
Man, Mitch is my guy, as you guys know. He's been a pleasant surprise, but as Mike said, you just don't know. He's still raw, as a prospect, and it would behoove them to wait it out until the last minute and gauge where his market value is. But part of the issue is, if you're talking about bringing in Drummond, you're going to stymie his development. If you don't have a proper point guard or effective point guard play, you're also not going to get the most out of him. So you just don't know where his market value is. As Mike said, they're going to be going star hunting. I think it's going to be Bradley Beal. I think Bradley Beal is going to be the guy that they're going to target, whether it's the summer next trade deadline or the summer after that. He's going to be in their sights. And Mitch could be a guy, the Wizards or one of these teams, they're going to want, young upstart talent in addition to draft picks. So Mitch could be one of those guys that could be dealt for a guy like a Bradley Beal. So I'm just not sure how much you want to invest in that front court, with Julius looking like he's going to be a candidate to get close to max dollars and come back with the Knicks. Do you put that money in a Drummond for a 4-year 64 or in a Mitch for a 4-year 64 when the team is not complete and the team is not done being built? I'd rather invest that money in the perimeter and make that investment there.
And Bradley Beal, man, imagine him in the Garden, the way he can shoot.
Yeah,
that would be crazy. Ian, is that something on the Knicks horizon potentially, or just throwing it out there?
Yeah, with the Beal stuff, at least my read on it, just in talking to people a couple months ago, was that if the Knicks were going to trade for Beal, they would have to really gut their roster. And then for Beal, he's made it clear he wants to win. And if he leaves Washington, he'd be searching for a place where he could win. So would he be excited about coming to New York if the roster is barren again? That would be my big question there. And I don't know that he would be. So I think the Knicks are kind of aware of that dynamic too. So until they kind of put more in place. And until they are in a position where whatever they have to give up in a Beal trade, they still have a solid roster in place for Beal coming here. I don't see it as a strong possibility until they get to that place.
All right. And Ian, CP touched on, the game that RJ Barrett had last night against the Wizards. Incredible performance in the comeback win, 24 points, 9 of them coming in the fourth quarter. What have been your biggest takeaways from RJ Barrett in this season?
To me, it's kind of just more of what you saw from him as a rookie, not necessarily on the court, but the intangibles, because you can see that he just comes to work every day and he gives it his all every day, practice, court, game, whatever. He is a diligent worker. And that's what the Knicks talked about last year with him, why they were optimistic about him because of his approach to his craft. You've seen it pay dividends now this year with the improved finishing at the rim, the improved perimeter shooting, the improved reads at the rim. So, it's really just the work continuing for him and starting to see the benefits of that work. And I really think that, he's got this mentality where he wants to win and he doesn't care, if he gets numbers doing it, he just wants to win. And that is so valuable, I think, in the NBA, especially for a young player who just has that laser focus on just trying to get better and trying to help your team win games. That's what I see from him. And that to me is what's most impressive here outside of the jumps in the shooting percentages and his, second half last night. It's just that to me.
And Michael, where do you see RJ's ceiling right now? And how can he even get better? Because clearly you're not as good or as high on as other.
Well, I'm talking about Barrett. I mean, to me, Randall and Barrett are the future of the franchise. You can sprinkle in a little Mitchell Robinson or Quickly or Toppin and see some exciting flashes here and there. But RJ Barrett and Randall is the future, and they got to maximize their talent. And I think Randall is doing that. And I think Barrett is on his way to doing that. You just need to see it for a longer period of time. He's done it. He's improved. His shooting percentage has improved. Everything about his game is improved, but he's still young. There's guys that have been really good for a year or two and then plateau. So he's got to do it every day, come into work every day. And those two guys are the future. And going back to, the Bradley Beal talk, they need to find one more guy. And if they get one more guy with Julius Randle, then you can start talking to Bradley Beal, and then you can extend Barrett, and then you got 3-4 horses where you can go make a legitimate run, for a championship and call yourself, one of the 7 or 8 best teams. And we actually have a chance this year.
Yeah, and that would be great for Knicks fans to see that come to fruition. And Ian C. Mamba on YouTube wants to ask you about Kevin Knox and Frank Ntilikina. Did they come up at all in the trade deadline?
Talking to other teams, I got the sense that they were available, which shouldn't be a surprise at all, because for the right deal, if the Knicks liked the player in a trade and the cost was Ntilikina and Knox or one or the other, it shouldn't surprise you that they would have done the deal. But obviously nothing reached that level of deal making. So they're here. And I think that what you see from Ntilikina, I think Thibodeau likes. I mean, he sees something there. I've mentioned that a couple of times. Like, he feels like there's a player there, if he's in the right situation. Knox, I'm not as clear on how he's felt about him, but he was certainly complimentary of the minutes that Knox gave them last night in that win. But you see him out of the rotation. So you're not sure what to make of it. But I would just think in general that those two would be available in any trade that the Knicks felt was a solid deal. I don't think any of them would be off limits in any deal. So I think that's kind of status quo there.
And one quick Nets question before we finish things up with the Knicks, Ian. Gabe Granite, I'm joining in late. Is there any news on who's trying to come to Brooklyn? And are there any new waived players?
So I don't think anybody new has been waived yet. I think the Drummond wave is still being worked through. Aldridge is done. I would expect Otto Porter to be waived and to be available. Maybe Gorgie Deng in Memphis becomes available via waive. Mo Harkless possibly. So those, there might be others, but those are the names that I feel will be in the marketplace. And I'm sure, Drummond, I think all along, everybody assumed he was going to consider Brooklyn. but maybe the idea that they can't give him a big role there, maybe that turns him off. I don't know. But I think Brooklyn will get consideration with all these players because of where they are. They have the roster spots. They're ready to make a title run. So if you're bought out, why wouldn't you want to at least kick the tires on a Brooklyn situation?
Right, definitely. And one last question for all of you guys. We'll start with CP. What are your expectations, CP, for the Knicks coming down the stretch here?
Biggest question mark is Derrick Rose and his impact on his team. You know, when he came in, he immediately lifted the bench. When he started for Elfrid Payton, he immediately lifted the offense in terms of chemistry with Julius and RJ. I think him getting back up to speed, getting his conditioning up is really pivotal for this team making this playoff push. And I want to see how Tibbs is going to use him. Is he going to close with him? Does he start? I really feel like we need Rose's playmaking potential instead of Payton's. It's just a matter of how much minutes can he log. Secondly, how much contribution are you going to continue to get from Alec Burks and Emmanuel Quickley? The bench production is going to be key. They're in the midst of a dogfight right now. Right now, they're in fifth. By Saturday, they could be back to seventh or eighth. So it's going to keep fluctuating as they continue. But I think Rose's health and then the bench production between Burks and IQ are going to be pivotal.
Yeah, Rose's health is so significant. You saw the way that he changed how this offense flowed when he came in from Detroit. Michael, what are your expectations for the Knicks down the stretch?
You know, for me, it's a question mark. It's a question mark. Like you said, we're a couple games away from being, you know, seventh, eighth, or ninth. And, you know, can they finish what they've started? It's been a great start to the season. It's exciting in the fifth spot. Can they fight their way and stay in the 4, 5, 6 spot? And can they win a playoff series? You know, I don't think that's out of the question with how hard they play. You know, in the NBA, you can win on any given night. And with how hard they play and the way Julius Randle's been playing, you know, I would expect them obviously to make the playoffs. I would expect them to give a first round, you know, matchup where they win a few games and maybe things go well and they could win a playoff series. But they got to maintain the status quo.
Ian, what about you? What are your expectations for them down the stretch?
Well, I think CP hit on the elements there that I think are critical with Derrick Rose, and then production off the bench and health obviously plays a role in everything. But I think, you know, if all things remain the same, Rose comes back at some point soon and he comes back as himself, they should at least get into that play-in tournament, right? I think that's a reasonable expectation based on what we've seen from the group so far. And if they get in that play-in tournament, I mean, the way Tom Thibodeau coaches and prepares and the way his staff prepares, I think they would have a pretty good shot at, you know, single game tournament, winning 2 games, winning 1 game to get in. And so I like their chances there. So I think they should get into the playoffs, again, assuming Rose comes back and assuming you continue to get production off the bench from guys like Burks.
And Knicks fans are just salivating for the Knicks to finally get back into the playoffs so they can have something to cheer about. And hopefully more fans will be able to go to the Garden when the playoffs do happen. That's going to wrap up the Putback with Ian Begley trade deadline recap. Our thanks to Michael Vandegarde for his perspective, as well as CP. As always, be sure to give Knicks Fan TV a follow because it's great content, always pumping out fun stuff, informative things. We'll be back Wednesday, people, at 4 for our normal show on SNY.TV. For Ian Begley,